We'll now hear from senior geologist Raphael Quentin de Gromard. Raphael has a PhD in structural geology from James Cook University and currently works in the Archean geodynamics branch.
Thank you, Charlotte. All right, so today I've got the difficult task to present the pre-Mesozoic interpreted bedrock geology of the southwest Yilgarn. It's a difficult task because it's a big map and I will only have the time here probably to introduce the map. Please come and see us at the end towards our poster there if you have any further questions. First of all, I'd like to thank the co-authors of the map, Tim and Ivan, but also everyone who was involved in the southwest Yilgarn AGP, as this map really is an integration of a large amount of the data and interpretations that were released as part of the Southwest Yilgarn Geological Exploration Package. Okay, so why the Southwest Yilgarn? Firstly, looking at the distribution of the operating mines, shown in here, one can wonder if this region is underexplored compared to the rest of the Yilgarn Craton, and perhaps this is because the southwest forms one of the least well understood part of the Yilgarn Craton. Secondly, the pre-AGP interpreted bedrock geology map, we knew that just did not honor the complexity of the geology of the southwest Yilgarn. And thirdly, all previous GSWA interpretation and mapping in this region was all done pre-seamless high-resolution gravity and magnetic coverage. So for all these reasons, the southwest form was chosen as a prime target for the AGP, and it was decided that an updated IBG should form the main interpretive product. And so here on the right panel, I'm showing here the new geology polygons produced for the Southwest AGP, draped over the state IBG, and I trust that you will appreciate that this map adds a large amount of information to the geology of the Southwest. Okay, so let's zoom into the map. There you go. So it forms an area that is approximately a quarter of the size of the whole Yilgarn Craton. It extends from the Darling Fault in the west into the Southern Cross, Forestania, and Ravensthorpe Greenstone Belt in the east, and it includes Wongan Hills and Kalingari in the north and extends into the Albany-Fraser orogen in the south. Probably one of the most important outcomes of this interpretation is the updated location and significance of the terrain boundary between the southwest terrain and the UNME terrain. And we interpret this terrain boundary, here shown by the red line, to lie at the southwestern margin of the newly defined Corrigine tectonic zone. And I will talk about the justifications and the rationale behind the interpretation of this new terrain boundary throughout the talk and while presenting the various elements of the map. So now I want to emphasize, as soon as this next slide comes in, there we go, that this map really integrates a large number of data sets that we have been either collated from legacy data or that have been acquired during the AGP. So the main data sets that were used include isotopic data, geophysical data, legacy GSWA mapping, as well as company mapping, and various point data sets including geochemistry, geochronology, field observations. Oh, for once that worked, I tried to. Field observations and mineral exploration data. Okay, so this map consists of 4 interpretive layers, about 7,900 aeromagnetic form lines. They are particularly useful to characterize the ductile architecture of the crust. About 3,900 structure lines forming the backbone of the map. About 1,600 geopolygons. And about 6,000 geolines that are largely consisting of interpreted mafic dike segments. Okay, moving on. So the mafic dikes were entirely redrawn from the aeromagnetic dataset to ensure that cross-cutting relationships between dikes and structures were systematically captured and interpreted consistently. Based on previous interpretations, recent ages, orientation, and cross-cutting relationships, these were all assigned to 12 different mafic dike suites, ranging in age from 2615 MA to 733 MA. Note that the 2615 MA Yandini dolerite suite cross-cuts the corriging tectonic zone, or CTZ, that is shown here by the gray polygon, providing a minimum age of deformation along the CTZ. And you see that the CTZ is also cross-cut by younger dolerite suites, including the east-trending 2410 Wigimultha dolerite. But it appears to form a major control on the emplacement of the northwest trending, this one in here, 1390 MA, Biberkin dolerite suite, suggesting that the CTZ may be of crustal scale. The structural lines provide the structural framework for the IBG and really forms the backbone of the map. Each structure was attributed as either fault or as minor or major shear zones, and where constraints are known with deep estimates, deep directions, kinematics, and maximum and minimum ages. Here on the left-hand side, the diagram shows in here the ductile fabrics only, shown over the gravity data. And we can recognize a complex system of anastomosing shear zones on the right-hand side of the newly defined tectonic terrain boundary, which clearly differs drastically from the deformation history that we see in the redefined southwest terrain. Then on the right-hand side of the diagram, I've plotted the thin and linear structures that we see in the magnetics and interpreted here as brittle faults. Some of them can be hundreds of kilometers long, and they mostly cross-cut the corriging tectonic zone, again providing some relative age constraints between various structures. So in terms of age constraints for the structures, I was able to assign age constraints to about half of the structures based on cross-cutting relationships with dated geological features, which resulted in a total of 13 age brackets for the timing of movement along these structures. Wow, it has finally come. So a total of 13 age constraint structure sets, but I will show you here only a simplified version of it through a succession of 5 main time slices. So the maximum age of the older structures is not constrained, but it may be as old as 3GA, but both these structure sets, here and this one, the red ones, are truncated by the corriging tectonic zone, and deformation along the corriging tectonic zone is interpreted to have occurred between 2665 and 2635 MA, based on the ages of emplacement of syntectonic granites and the age of high-grade metamorphism. Then the northeast to north-northeast trending sets of faults that cross-cut the corriging tectonic zone also cross-cut 2630 MA granites, but they predate the emplacement of the 2410 Wigimultha dolerite. Then these faults are affected by northwest trending shear zones that appear to have formed synchronously with structures of the Albany-Fraser orogeny. Finally, north trending structures parallel to the Darling fault here affect the 1210 Boyagin dolerite suite, providing a maximum age for deformation along these structures, along the proto-Darling fault. However, we know of north trending Archean igneous fabrics existing in the region, But the minimum age for deformation along these structures may be as young as the latest movement along the Darling Fault. Okay, so here the diagram on the left here shows our very extensive granite geochemical dataset that is plotted over the aeromagnetic data. The triangles in here show the distribution of the high calcium granite. The hexagons show the distribution of the low calcium granite. The blue color is for sodic granite. The pink color is for potassic. And the deeper the color, from light blue to deep blue and from light pink to deep pink, represents a higher strontium over yttrium ratio, which represents a deeper melting source region. Then the red color symbols here mostly represent phosphorus-rich granites, representing granites with really high, really elevated melting temperatures. And then we've got also the green stars here that are representing sanicutoids and sanicutoid-like rocks. Then we were able to make correlations between the granite geochemical datasets and the geophysical characteristics, which allowed us to produce a granite map that is extremely informative and help us think about processes of crust formation, granite emplacement, and exhumation. Then from the greenstone geochemical dataset, combined with lithological descriptions obtained from field data captured in WAROX, as well as from company data, we were able to produce a greenstone lithological association map. And on either side of the redefined terrain boundary, we see that the lithological associations in these supracrustal packages are different. On the right-hand side of the red line, we see a greater abundance of mafic-dominated greenstones, and typically the sedimentary components in there contain more abundant banded iron formations than in the southwest, than the supracrustal packages of the southwest terrain, which are largely dominated by Semitic and Paleolithic lithologies. Okay, so if we now zoom out and have a look at the West Yilgarn as a whole and have a look at this redefinition of the terrain boundary, on the left-hand side here, I'm showing the samarium neodymium isotope map, and the colored dots are GSWA and GA crystallization ages, and they are sized by age. The faded blue line here represents the approximate location of the previously proposed terrain boundary between the UNB terrain and the southwest terrain. And the granite crystallization, the igneous crystallization ages show that in this portion of the map that was previously interpreted as southwest terrain, we see 2.8, 2.9, 3 billion-year-old rocks similar to what we see elsewhere in the UNB terrain, providing another line of evidence that, that this portion of the crust actually probably is UNB terrain as well. And this is in stark contrast with our redefined southwest terrain, in which currently we have not identified any rocks older than 2.7 GA. And the neodymium data, also, if we dismiss the younger Q isotopic zone, it seems to indicate that the whole of the UNB terrain evolved overall over an older crust than the southwest terrain. Then the diagram on the right here, I'm showing the dots in here are where we've got PT data and also time data, metamorphic age data. That's shown over the magnetic image. And that really is emphasizing the fact that this portion of the UNB terrain is in fact a higher grade metamorphic equivalent to the rest of the UNB terrain, but that was affected by a granulite facies event at about 2640 MA. All right, so we can show all this data combined on this time-space plot, shown here on the right-hand side of the slide. And it shows that the U and Me terrain contains a very prolonged history of geological history predating 2705 MA, and this is shown both in the supracrustal packages as well as all in the igneous history. The mineralization ages as well extend, and the deformation history as well is older than anything we see so far in the southwest terrain that seems to contain only a geological history post-dating 2705 MA. Okay, in terms of exploration potential in the map area, I'm showing here on this figure the relationship between the known gold and nickel mineralization sites, the Samarian neodymium isotopic map, the mapped shear zones from this map, and the occurrences of sanicutoid and sanicutoid-like rocks. And we see a good correlation between the intersection of major shear zones, steep isotopic gradients, and sanicutoids. For example, we've got Julimar that sits here, Boddington that sits just there, Tempia sits in here, and we see other gold occurrences also happening on the margins. Now there are several locations that may form a new search space for exploration, given the apparent association between sanicutoid and gold mineralization. All right, so there are other locations where we've identified sanicutoids and that are also located at the margins or at the intersection between major shear zones and the terrain boundary, and also at the margins of steep isotopic gradients. We can see that in here on Katanning, we can see that also somewhere in there, and we can see other sanicutoid-like rocks along strike of Boddington, along major shear zones. Other potential targets may be around Bridgetown, and there are other several locations as well, potentially in the northern part of the map. Okay, so where do we go next? Well, first of all, we would like to test a lot of the interpretations that incurred from the making of this map through GSWA's traditional field mapping, but also through several collaborations between companies and universities, mostly in the form of several honors and PhD projects currently being drafted and proposed. And GSWA will also continue to use its highly sophisticated tool, this little boy here, to interrogate geological data to produce unified interpretations to fill in our knowledge gaps in the West Yilgarn project. Thank you.